Hi, this is Stuart Weems and welcome to the Investopoly podcast. My goal is to give you simple, easy to understand strategies, insights and tips to help you master the game of building wealth. And in this episode, I'd like to talk about the 3 things that Paul Nugent taught me about investing in property. Now, Paul Nugent was the co-owner of Wakeland Property Advisory, a Melbourne-based buyer's agency. And my business, Pro Solution Private Clients, has worked very closely with Wakeland Property Advisory for when we have clients that want to invest in property in Melbourne for probably around 15 years. And so about 14 years ago, I met Paul. He was the co-owner of that buyer's agency, and he'd been a buyer's agent for 20 years or so. Unfortunately, Paul passed away on the 19th of November this year, and he was an absolute true gentleman with an encyclopedic knowledge of the Melbourne property market, and whilst I never would ever dare say it to his face, he had a great sense of humour as well. So he was really enjoyable to work with. And I guess over the last couple of weeks, I've been sort of reflecting on our interactions, our conversations, and the clients that we worked on, the presentations that we did together, which were numerous. And I really appreciate, obviously from a personal interaction level, our relationship and friendship that we fostered over that time. But also, the sharing of knowledge, and obviously with Paul's passing, a lot of knowledge goes with him. Anyway, so I was reflecting upon that, and I was sort of thinking, well, what are the 3 things that Paul really taught me about investing in property? And some of these might be a bit sort of unique, so they're not necessarily sort of generic lessons. And they were sort of unique to Paul, and that's what I'd like to talk about in this week's podcast. So let's jump into it. So Paul's lesson number 1 is that some properties just take time. And I guess it reminds me of Warren Buffett's saying that the stock market is an efficient device that transfers money from the impatient to the patient. And really a key ingredient to a robust, low-risk, high-reward, long-term investment strategy, a key ingredient is time. You really need to let time do its thing. But you also need to have the patience to entrust that the fundamentals of investment will actually shine through in the long run, and that's quite difficult to do if you buy an asset that is ostensibly a fantastic quality asset but doesn't perform in the short run, and even in the medium term it doesn't perform, and it really tests an investor's patience. But if you withstand that test, the rewards are definitely there in the long run. I remember speaking to a really very wealthy, very successful business owner and property investor. He's telling me about a commercial property that he owned that he bought 10 or 11 years ago. And he said for the first 9 or 10 years of owning that property, it did nothing. And in the last year, it's doubled in value. So he's got all these returns in the last year. And I think it's a really good story to demonstrate what Paul was teaching here, is that the fundamentals work in the long run, but you really do need to have the patience. And really this is most applicable, I think, to entry-level investment-grade properties. So, if you buy something that's, has a very strong land value component, a house in a prime suburb like Hawthorn in Melbourne, for example, you probably don't need to have too much patience. That thing will probably work pretty quickly in terms of start delivering returns relatively quickly. But if you buy an entry-level 1970s apartment in Richmond, for example, that doesn't, it's not very pretty, but still has all the sound fundamentals, it's possible you need to wait 20 years to really see adequate returns over that 20-year period. So the average return over the 20-year period will be okay. It might be that for the first 15 years the return is very ordinary, and you get all the return in the last 5 years, and that's what sort of Paul was sort of talking about. Now, we can't confuse patience with apathy. We must absolutely review the performance of properties, but most importantly, I think we must review the fundamentals with the property so that we can become absolutely certain that we've got a quality asset. If we've got a quality asset, close your eyes. You don't even have to cross your fingers. Close your eyes. It will work. Just don't focus on the returns. The returns will come if you're patient enough. And as Warren Buffett says, money will transfer from the impatient to the patient. The impatient people will go and sell that asset or not buy it or whatever, and you will be rewarded for your patience. The next lesson is that you should invest when your circumstances allow it and ignore other indicators, all other indicators. And this is probably, really insightful advice, particularly in this market where there's a lot of negativity around property and property investment and so forth. Paul used to say you should invest when your circumstances allow it, not any sooner or later than that. So really he's sort of saying run your own race and ignore all the negative media. And certainly, there's been a lot recently, hasn't there, with a small retraction in property prices. In some geographical locations, there've certainly been bigger falls. Negative gearing being abolished by the ALP if and when they win the election next year, which looks more certain than not. And things like credit tightening and so forth. So a lot of negativity. But as Warren Buffett says, and I keep quoting him, but a lot of his quotes are really applicable. Be fearful when people are greedy and be greedy when people are fearful. At the moment, the media is quite fearful in respect to property, and the masses will typically follow that media. So perhaps this is a really good time for you to become, in a way, greedy. But Paul used to say that, look, there's never going to be a perfect time to buy property. In fact, there's always going to be a reason not to do so. And he used to reflect on his own personal circumstances. Every time he's bought property, there were certain uncertainties specific to his financial situation and also in the macro market that would have been arguably good reasons not to do so, not to go ahead and buy property. So he would say, if you're waiting for this magical time for someone to sort of tap you on the shoulder and say, look, now is the perfect time, there's no negativity whatsoever and there's only ever upside, that time is just never going to happen, and you'll procrastinate, you'll stay out of the market, and you'll never enjoy the returns, and the opportunity cost is so significant. So it really comes back to focusing on the things that we can control. We can control to some extent how much money we earn. We certainly can control what we do with that money, so how much we spend and how much we invest. We can certainly control in the assets in which we choose to invest in, and we can control our investment strategy. What we can't control, tax legislation. We can't control markets. We can't control what happens at a political level. We can't control consumer sentiment, and we certainly can't control the media and what they like to talk about. So trying to focusing on those things that we can't control is really not going to help you in your investment journey, and it's probably just going to create more anxiety. And as I said, it's not going to be a help. So Paul's lesson was run your own race, invest when your circumstances allow it, be prudent, be conservative, have a well thought out strategy. But as long as you're doing those things, then just ignore the media and it should work out fine for you. And the third lesson from Paul was that most people truly don't understand how investment grade property works. And it sounds a bit arrogant, I guess, but in my view, I think he's correct. There's a lot of people, and particularly commentators and professionals, that really don't understand property well enough to give quality advice to their clients. And there's a couple of, points I'd like to make here. Firstly, we really need to be careful about the definition of property. So when Paul was talking about property, he was really only talking to investment grade property, which is arguably maybe less than 5% of all the total properties in Australia. Whereas when the media talks about property, they almost refer to it as one big sort of homogenous mass, as if it's one big market. They're all kind of properties are the same, and we can make sort of generalizations. Obviously, we know when we make gross generalizations, it really waters down the impact of the commentary. I guess talking about the property market at a macroeconomic level There's relevance in that, but that's not that relevant to making investment decisions, because, we're not looking to invest out the back of Bourke. We're looking to invest in a prime blue chip suburb. There's a stark difference between those two. So generalisations aren't going to help us. And so when you read commentary or listen to commentary in the media, you need to ask yourself, are they talking about property generically, or are they talking about investment grade property? And if it's the former, it's probably not going to be helpful to you as an investor. But putting that aside for a second, Paul's comment was more aimed at people that really were trying to talk about investment grade property. And he would often pick holes in a lot of stuff that a lot of commentators would put out there. And I think, part of it would be that, they didn't have a full understanding. There's going to be another part, maybe the cynic in me, that says that, well, maybe they understood, but it wasn't in their commercial interest to really understand. And what they were espousing was more like what's in their best commercial interest rather than in their clients' or an investor's best interest. But the key thing from this learning, from my perspective, is be very, very careful who you listen to. And there's some great people out there, really knowledgeable people in the property and investment space that I have a lot of time for, that I listen to. But you have to be very, very picky and really understand and really appreciate, does this person know what they're talking about? And I think there's no substitute for experience. So, knowledge is great, but experience really tells you how and when to apply that knowledge. So when I look to whether to follow someone, I ask two questions. Do they eat their own cooking? So, have they built wealth using property? Are they doing what they say they're doing, or are they just talking about it? And secondly, how long have they been doing it for? People that have been doing it for many decades have seen many cycles, many situations, thousands of clients and good and bad properties, and you can't really ever replicate that experience other than doing those number of years. So there you have it. There's 3 lessons from Paul. Look, I hope you get a lot out of that. I certainly will miss our interactions, conversations, and jokes and so forth. So I'm forever thankful in Paul passing on that knowledge to me, and I hope me passing on to you really benefits you a lot. So that's it for now. Until next week, bye for now.